Coming up on Mediaographer Online, we talk about the traditional ad-supported TV model versus Patreon. Also, is Facebook's new instant articles all cracked up to be for content providers?
Mediaographer.
Welcome to Mediaographer Online, the show about the ever-changing video world. I'm Christopher Michael McHugh, joined as always with TV's Phil Capello and our special guest tonight, John Leland from Combridges. And we're talking the media ecosystem, a term that we just coined actually a few minutes before the show. And what we mean by that is looking at, say, ad-sponsored TV, bundles, and you've got your a la carte, and things like Patreon. Well, John, for people that don't know, can you explain a little bit what Patreon is?
Sure. Patreon it's kind of like an evolutionary step, I think, beyond Kickstarter, where people can pay what they want. Essentially, you become a patron of an artist. And I want to recommend to our viewers Amanda Palmer, who's a musician who kind of came on the scene as a result of doing a very successful Kickstarter for her album. I believe the numbers are that she asked for $100,000 and got $1.2 million. And she's now moved over to Patreon, where people can subscribe for $1, for $5, whatever they want, for her next thing. And because she has 4,000 people supporting her, she gets, I believe, around $30,000 for every new thing, which could be a book, it could be a new album, it could be a piece of music, art, whatever. So people subscribe and support, they patronize, if you will, artists that they like, and they pay what they want. A lot of podcasters are using it so that people pay $1 per podcast to support somebody to continue to crank out episodes. So it's a completely different model than we've ever seen in television, where subscribers are, one, paying voluntarily, supporting programs that they want to support, and doing it on a per program basis.
When I first heard about this, it sounded to me a lot almost like the non-for-profit NPR PBS model. And I sort of questioned, is Patreon really going to be able to provide the same sort of quality of programming, which is essentially asking for viewer support without the sort of curation that obviously is coming from sort of the previous non-for-profit television model.
And Phil, maybe the curation, we are the curators, because there's this one guy that I watch. I know the name sounds silly, but he's heavy metal Jesus, and he's been doing video game reviews for years and years and years, and he's finally moving over to this Patreon model. And the video that he had where he was pitching was just so well thought out, and what he was going to do with the money and the production value that he was going to bring. So what he does is already what I think a pretty solid show. The fact that he's going to be getting more money to be doing an even better show, have more resources, and who knows, maybe he's editing an editor, buying some graphics packages, that type of thing. I thought, wow. But, you are becoming a professional beggar, just like at Pledge Drive. So there's the downside.
Which is actually a big piece of Amanda Palmer's story, because she originally was a statue standing in Harvard Square being the 10-foot bride. But I think that what goes on here is that it isn't one thing or the other, Phil, in terms of, will this replace broadcasting? I think we're going to have broadcasting and the traditional kind of curations, but the pie just keeps having more slices. And that includes subscribing to YouTube channels. I'm even thinking about, for example, on Instagram, there's a very funny, outrageous guy called The Fat Jewish, all one word, The Fat Jewish, who does outrageous Instagram posts, and it's humor. It's almost like reading cartoons. But he's a media producer who is just making stuff, and I'm following him. So, there's no monetary exchange in that case. But, we support artists, we buy albums, we watch shows in all kinds of forms. And what's happening with this media, explosion of putting the power into more people's hands is we're getting more and more different forms of media. So TV is not going to go away, but on the other hand, particularly in the younger demographics, people are more and more watching their own media.
And what was the name of that person again?
The Fat Jewish.
Here's my hard segue here. I worked with somebody a few years ago that lived in Dobbs Ferry, New York, and her father would always say, "Why don't you go date that nice Jewish boy, Mark Zuckerberg?" And she goes, "Oh, no, he's so boring. I don't want anything to do with him." Well, anyway, She should have dated the nice Jewish boy from Dobbs Ferry, which was my segue into Facebook. John, you were just talking to us before the show about the new instant articles that are inside part of Facebook now. Now, how's that working with the articles and video? Can you explain a little bit more?
Yeah, the instant articles that Facebook announced about a week ago, I think, maybe 2 weeks, is their development of their ecosystem. I mean, Facebook is so massive as a media consumption platform, and they're working more and more to leverage their advertising. And the way that they're doing that is improving the deliverability. There's a lot, there's a lot of buzz about native advertising, right? So which means we're going to create our own program. It's like, the old TV shows back in the day when they all had sponsors who basically underwrote the production. Well, what Facebook has done is really brought that into the 21st century and allowing publishers from the New York Times and National Geographic all the way down the pipe, if you will, and brought them into this delivery mechanism. The thing about it is that it's not really going to a website, it's within Facebook and using the Facebook apps to deliver the content. The biggest thing that the user notices is that the stuff loads like a rocket ship. I mean, it just is right there, and that includes video.
When I first heard about this, it sort of reminded me that now there's this inherent nostalgia for Flash, which some of the young people may not remember, but Flash was one of the first things that allowed web pages to sort of look sexy and have some music and have some stuff going. But the problem was if you put too much on, it crashed. And as things sort of got more progressed, you ended up with the further along HTMLs and JavaScript and that type of thing. But to your point, it's the fact that it's able to load really quick and have a really seamless interaction. And it seems like this is sort of the next step along those lines, where it's trying to have a real, true media experience on the internet as opposed to just the internet being a less good version of television.
Flash and rocket ships. It sounds like a episode of Captain Video over here. Now, here's the problem, though, from a content.
You always go retro on us.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I always, so progressive behind me with the old radio. We'll be listening to Fibber McGee and Molly later on. Here's the thing, though, a content provider. All right, Facebook, we're on there. You got me, and then they say, oh, by the way, we're going to take a huge cut. 75% now. What are you going to do about it? You're relying on us now.
Well, I'm not privy to all the business side of it, but one has to presume that people like the New York Times and National Geographic, et cetera, are appreciating the increased exposure, and they don't necessarily think that having all the eyeballs in their camp is the highest leverage way to go. They want to be in everyone's camp. And the thing that we haven't said yet, which is sort of obvious but is a key component, is that Facebook then can do the programmatic buying, calculate the algorithms in terms of audiences, and deliver the advertising, and they're controlling the eyeballs by keeping people consuming media within Facebook rather than leaving Facebook. And that gives them a lot of power, which obviously they want. It also makes them a better advertising delivery platform. Let me just throw in a related point, which is that, one of the charts in Mary Meeker's annual presentation shows the amount of advertising dollars being spent relative to the time that people spend on that media, right? TV is relatively parallel. Print is way behind. There's way more advertising dollars being spent comparing to the amount of time that people are spending. And the same is true of mobile. Mobile video, I just read a statistic today, is increasing 3 times the rate of digital video advertising in terms of the ad spend. And the amount of time that people are spending on mobile is going up so much faster than the ability to deliver the advertising. And Facebook is getting themselves into a position to hopefully at least compete with Google, who controls much of the mobile advertising dollar at the moment.
I think the thing that you need to worry about, too, as a content provider is being reliant on one of these channels. And I was thinking about YouTube. All YouTube is a video hosting service. You used to just put it on something like, Bluehost or something like that before, have it on your own servers. And that's what they're doing, except they're adding the functionality of the fact that they'll have lots of people there at their hub, and you could search the video. But to me, it's so
That's not.
interesting.
I need to interrupt there because YouTube, just like Netflix, just like Amazon, and down the line, is doing original production now. I mean,
Yeah.
they're doing program development, delivering channels, developing stars, everything that a traditional, whether it's 20th Century Fox or Disney or whoever does, as well as ABC, NBC, CBS. All of those over-the-top media companies now are doing original programming and developing stars, including YouTube.
No, but isn't YouTube's business model just a little bit different than Netflix in so much as Netflix seems to have a much more high-budget sort of traditional type television production model, where you're bringing in producers. I know they do greenlight them as opposed to having a pilot the way the networks do. But it seems that YouTube is bringing in a lot of people that have previously built an audience on YouTube, and then they're either giving additional funding and studio space and then splitting the revenues, as opposed to, bringing in a Kevin Spacey a la House of Cards and saying, give me a multi-million-dollar production.
Which isn't the model they started out with. I mean, the reason the top websites are the top website is because they siphon off user-generated content. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, all of these, they don't produce anything at all, So to me, it's just so funny that these people that just siphon off all of mine and your work and all our comments and make money off of it, and then they try and turn into a studio. But meanwhile, they really put the screws to a lot of these big content producers that were relying on them, saying, "Oh, by the way, you got your own sponsors? No. Now you're going to go do a split deal with us, or nothing, or you could go take a walk." And it's we're going to try and get on our air here somebody that was in that situation, and it'd be interesting to hear from them. I have heard some people just say, you know what, I'm just going to go with it with the revenue split, and hopefully I get enough eyeballs on me. But I'm sure there's a lot of smaller niche broadcasters out there on YouTube that only have a few hundred views that need that sponsorship, because those sponsors know that those 100 or so eyeballs are the right ones, whereas they can't make money off of 1,000, 10,000 views per video.
Well, maybe that brings us back to this whole Patreon model where people don't necessarily need corporate sponsors, but if there's more of a direct type sponsorship, I just wonder if those dollars are going to be there.
Well, I think that where the dollars are there today, I mean, I agree with you that Netflix-style production tends to be more cinematic, if you will, but I also think that this kind of native programming on YouTube, I mean, a good example is Red Bull, and there's lots of examples, but Red Bull did these really extravagant, highly produced extreme sports videos that got an enormous number of viewers on YouTube. And so it's sponsored content that's attracting eyeballs and attracting advertising money, as opposed to buying spots on TV. They're producing their own shows and using YouTube as a distribution channel. Just one of the ways that YouTube has become much more about, it's become about a lot more than cat videos and user-generated content. That goes on, but there are all these other segments, including, program production that we're not necessarily watching in our demographic. But, for example, one guy I'm aware of, Fred Seibert, who was the director of creative services at MTV when I was at USA Network, he's working with YouTube now, and they have, companies that are generating, I believe, billions of views. And there's this whole ecosystem there where they're doing original production and generating large numbers that to your point, Chris is like are big enough numbers to support real advertising dollars.
Yeah. And John, last time we had you on, we didn't get to talk about this at all, but I wanted to ask you a little bit about your experience working at Night Flight, but also what you thought it brought to television. And this was a very unique type of programming. I mean, this was the days of, at least in the early days of it, with MTV, and the fact that you would have such a mishmash of content trying to fill these overnight hours. I looked at it and thought a little bit about it and read the Wikipedia on Night Flight, because I didn't really know how it got started and how it all worked. but I was looking at parallels right now as people are throwing things at the wall these days and trying to make them stick. But what was kind of your takeaway from Night Flight?
Well, you know, it's actually I have to. It's a little self-serving, but I go back further than Night Flight because I did my own TV show here in San Francisco called Went Like It Came around 1975. That was
I don't think we could say that on air.
It was kind of a hippie variety show, which Night Flight didn't have the live in studio component we did, but it's basically narrowcast programming to a specific target audience is what I would say about Night Flight. You know, MTV skewed a little bit younger. We were a little bit, you know, the baby boomer aging hippie market, which, you know, we weren't that aging at that point. But I don't even know if people know what Night Flight is. When I was at USA Network in the early 80s, Night Flight was our late night programming. And we had women programming during the day, and we had a lot of sports, and Night Flight kind of held up the weekend music slot. It didn't really compete with MTV. MTV was far bigger and far more significant in terms of that time. But I think really what we're talking about is unique programming to specific demographics that, you know, in those days was called narrowcasting. I use the term microcasting now because you have not only the tennis channel and the fly fishing channel and all that stuff on cable, but we can go right down into very granular levels of interest groups and demographics. And, you know, I mean, another example, my son has done a lot of work over many years for McSweeney's with Dave Eggers in San Francisco. And there's a young literary intellectual community that people aren't even aware of, but they follow the stuff, they buy the products, they subscribe. You know, Andrew, my son, is now doing a podcast with KCRW called The Organist. I'll put in a plug for him. But, you know, it's not on KCRW, the NPR station, but it's got a following because of this community and interest group of people interested in these authors and the cultural commentaries and the stuff that they do. It's a niche.
And that's the great thing about...
Night Flight was a niche, that's why.
And that's the great thing about when the industry has a shakeup like this or there's new technology, I think. Cable television innovation created all this opportunity, and what are we going to do to fill this time? And for example, the old comedy channel before it merged with Han became Comedy Central, they were looking for programming, and these guys in Minneapolis pitched Mystery Science Theater 3000, and to me, that's a completely original take on the B-movie type thing, to actually have people that you see in the front making fun of a movie, and the concept is they're trapped in space. To me, that's a completely and perhaps one of the most original concepts that I've ever heard of.
But I mean, I don't mean to interject here, but to get so wrapped up with originality, I mean, I'm all for originality, but I'm also for
you hate originality, Phil.
But I definitely am for the biggest and best productions that we possibly can get. Now, some of that may be provided by YouTube. I think Netflix is doing some really interesting stuff, but this is still America, and we still love our sports. And I am sort of amazed. It seems like a lot of the MLB.com and NFL.com and NHL.com, they've been really good about drawing some eyeballs. I know I sit away at work and watch the baseball game when I can, and it's not blacked out, which is a different issue. But what I find amazing is that the commercials that are bought locally on the television aren't automatically streamed, and a lot of time that commercial space is just filled with a full-screen graphic that says interruption for commercial. And it seems like, ironically, some of the advertisers, and to your point, aren't necessarily following where the future eyeballs are. That they're sort of set in the television and radio model because there may be a Nelson rating giving them exactly the number of eyeballs that are watching, and they can't trust themselves to sort of take this leap forward into the online world where you may not be able to know exactly how many people are watching, but it might be a lot more than the number of clicks you're getting.
Well, it's not future eyeballs. I just had to correct there. Is that it's current mobile usage, and the reality is, I mean, on one hand, there's your commitment to production, but on the other hand, there's the freedom of the consumer. And you know, I wrote about this in Videography, I don't know how many years ago, that, you know, I mean, the bottom line is that people want to watch what they want, when they want it, where they want it. And so mobile and all, you know, we were talking before we went on the air about mobile apps and that delivery of sports wherever you want it on your phone. is indicative of people going to Snapchat or people going to Periscope and watching, some guy sitting somewhere doing whatever. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily good programming, but I am saying that eyeballs are going there. And so the consumer has the control to choose what they want to watch. And there are all these new ways that they're watching whatever they want. And it isn't necessarily stuff that has good production values, and it definitely is not necessarily stuff that the Hollywood producers think that they should be watching.
Well, just a couple quick things before we go. A cheetah and a sports car. No, I'm just kidding. I've had too much caffeine. That's really wrapping it up for this week's show. Big thank you to our guest, John Leland from CommBridges. You could get a hold of him. Just got to Google CommBridges or go to combridges.com. And for Phil Capello, I'm Christopher Michael McHugh.